is Lisa, also known as Dawn Horvath of Beyond Betrayal Community. And you're listening to episode 1 of our Spiritual Crisis videocast series. Today's session is being recorded live from beautiful New Zealand on a gorgeous sunny day, August 27th, 2015. Spiritual crisis is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because that's part of my story. When my first marriage ended, I went through probably 2 years of a very deep spiritual crisis, and part of that was about not realizing that there was anybody else going through what I was going through. And I think it's really important that women know that they're not alone in this. What's going on is very common, and we're going to be digging into that a little bit today. My apologies if you're feeling like the audio and video is a bit out of sync. I guess this whole thing's just a miracle that it works even a little. So here I am on the other side of the planet, and I really am moving my lips and mouth, and words are coming out at the same time, but it just may not seem that way. So to give you a bit of background on the Spiritual Crisis blog and videocast series, because I'm writing a series of blogs right now at Beyond Betrayal, and that all started with Journey to Healing and Joy and Beyond Betrayal doing a joint survey. I think we started probably the end of May or early June, and we had a great response to that. Thank you to anyone who's listening right now who was part of that. And for me, that was about doing research for my book that's coming out next year, Beyond Betrayal. And for A Circle of Joy, that was about preparing to do support groups for women going through spiritual crisis, so that information was very helpful to them. And I'm also going to be using quotes. I'm going to be using parts of women's stories that they shared in a presentation that I'm doing this coming, for me, fall for our friends in the US and Canada. It's going to be about, it's aimed at pastors and people in ministry, and the topic is compassion. And it's going to be about teaching them about the trauma that women face who are married to sex addicts, the crisis of faith that they often experience, because a lot of them are just really unaware of what's going on in our lives and our hearts at that time. So at this point, I'm going to introduce you to a dear friend who I've known for the last 3 years. We met through Marsha Means, our joint mentor and friend, and this is my friend from across the pond, as we say down under, which means she's in Australia. I'm in New Zealand. And this is Amanda, who will be sharing some of her story. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. Hi, Lisa.
And Amanda was one of our survey respondents, and she shared her story, and I found it very powerful, very impactful. And I thought it was likely you would too. And I heard from multiple women who were in similar circumstances to Amanda. And I know Amanda has gone through the fire and come out the other side. And I thought that some of these women who were really still in the midst of it would benefit from hearing a little bit more about her story. So just to give you a little bit of background on Amanda, she was in a marriage as a younger woman. She's still a young woman from my point of view. But as a younger woman, she was in a marriage and that her husband was had a sexual addiction. She wasn't a Christian, and he wasn't a Christian, and the marriage broke up. And somewhere in that process, Amanda had a really tremendous encounter with God. He swooped her off her feet, and she, fell head over heels for him. And that started her journey walking with the Lord. Now, as part of that, she met a nice Christian man, probably via church. She'll fill me in if I'm wrong. And they became engaged. Amanda, do you want to tell us a little bit more about where things went from there?
Yeah, so for myself, I was introduced to Ivan through a mutual friend at church. It was actually her brother. So, I decided, okay, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to, meet a nice Christian man, and I did. And he was really nice. He was very kind and very warm, and just really nice characteristics, which I really, thought were really nice, and because it was a mutual friend of mine, I had a lot of trust there as well. So we did start dating. So we started dating for, a few months, and after that, we decided to get engaged. And so during that time, it wasn't easy. I started to see things with this gentleman that was really upsetting to me. Things like, we'd be going out for the day and he would be ogling women. Another time he would be looking, at the table at catalogues, with women on them. And Lisa, I don't know what else you want me to share, but just interject.
Yeah, no worries. I was thinking about you had concerns, and you took those concerns to elders in the church or to leaders in the church and said, there's a problem here. What should I be doing? And what kind of advice did you get back?
Yeah, so what occurred there was, my fiance and I, we decided that we needed to go and see the pastor because, there was some things that I was noticing, and then my fiance ended up going to see a counsellor, and he then stated that, he thinks that my fiance has a sexual addiction. So that's why we ended up going to our senior pastor at the church. And when we went to the senior pastor, he just listened, and he heard my fiance's side of the story and also my side of the story, and also just letting him know that I did have a background of being married to a sex addict prior as well. And our pastor at the time then responded that, yes, I understand that this is occurring, but because of, you having a husband that also had a past sexual addiction, that, Amanda, this has to do with you. This has to do with the trust issues that you have with God, that you're not believing that God can, do a work in Ivan's heart and change his heart. And so therefore I walked out of that room that day just thinking it was all me, that we actually went there because, I was at the stage where I didn't even know if I was hearing from God right. There was just so many different voices coming from different, friends and elders and leaders of the church, that that's why we went to the pastor getting guidance. And so instead of support on my side, and also for my fiance as well, it ended up being very, very crushing. Like I walked out of there and I was absolutely devastated, because then it was no longer my fiance's problem with sex addiction. It was actually my problem. Yeah,
and that's, and I'm sure you've heard that before, and so have I, and our survey certainly turned up stories very similar to that there's all kinds of support in the church, and I'm glad that it's good that there's more and more there's support in the church for the addict, but very often there's this tendency to try and lump the spouse, or in your case a fiance, in and say, well, you're the problem now, and there's no support for you. We're just, we're going to say you're lacking grace. That there's grace for him, but somehow there's no grace for me. Now, you are actually in an interesting position too, because you're a fairly new Christian at this point, and one of the things you mentioned was that your husband, because you guys did go ahead and get married, it was the advice you were given was to stick with it, and so you married, and he looked like the more mature Christian. He looked like spiritual guy, like a really spiritual guy, right?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, we had a lot of leaders that actually came. There was one particular couple that we were more or less encouraged to go and see, and they were supporting us to some degree, but not really. During that time, they were sort of diagnosing me with having a dissociative identity disorder during that time, and so therefore it wasn't just that I was dealing with, you know, my husband having a sexual addiction. I also had this, you know, these other words spoken over to me, and I had this other problem which I had no idea. Also, so for me, that I just went in this downward spiral. It was horrible, and so I went and saw a psychologist as well to see whether or not I did have it, and the psychologist said, "No, Amanda, you don't. Everyone has some form of dissociation due to trauma from the past, and that's all you're dealing with. Things are being triggered from your past marriage, and that's why, to some extent, you're just going through the symptoms of trauma, and you know, there's a little bit of you know, dissociation, but not that I have dissociative identity disorder." So so it always seemed to be targeted upon me. Like I seemed to be the focus rather than my husband at the time. So instead of actually getting him support and helping him and directing him, you know, to a place where he could, you know, find that there was other men that were safe that he could talk to, it was more or less just come along to our men's group that we hold, you know, on a fortnightly basis, and we'll support you. But it just wasn't enough. So at the time, you know, I was then, you know, just focusing on myself, as in the problems I had, and it wasn't just Ivan. So yeah, so it was awful, and I felt so alone, and I felt so isolated. No one understood me at all. Like even my friends didn't understand what was going on. When I'd speak about my husband's addiction, no one understood it because it's not something that anyone's really even experienced. They've heard of it, but they don't know what it entails. And so therefore I just felt extremely alone in the whole process. And a lot of my friends as well would say, "We believe that Ivan, sorry about that, we believe that your husband has come into your life. We have prayed him into being, and we believe that this is who you're supposed to be with." And so because I was so down and traumatized, and you know, and extremely depressed, that I was trusting these friends that I thought were more spiritual than me too, and yeah, that they could guide me. So yeah.
Wow. Now, in all this, did Ivan stand up for you? Did he say, you know, look, I think really the problem's mine, or was he just kind of on board with the rest of them?
No, he would then focus on me. So, for example, if he had acted out, if he, you know, was caught even, you know, starting to attach to a woman emotionally at work, or he was, you know, he couldn't stop looking at other women, and I could, you know, I knew that something wasn't right. Sometimes he'd come home from work, and so therefore I, you know, in my stomach, I would just get this turning, and I would just know that he was hiding something. And when I would point that out to him, he would then turn everything back around on me, that, you know, I'm not really listening to God properly. You know, yeah, so that was really hard on my part, because when I would see things, then everything was turned back on me, and then he would then focus on, oh, Amanda, they've been saying that you've had the dissociative identity disorder, so it must be you. You're actually blowing things out of proportion. Yeah.
Right. Now, was there anybody in the church at that time that was showing you compassion and, or supporting you as a person, or like, were these friends, were these church friends, or?
These were my church friends, yes. I actually did have support from other Christian ladies which were outside of my church, which I'd actually got to know over the years. And there was about 7 of them in particular, and they were just a great group of women that I used to just go out with, and we used to just go to the movies, we'd go out for coffee, we'd go on holidays and things like that together. But it wasn't super spiritual or anything like that. It was just a group of girls hanging out and just loving each other. And they're the ladies that supported me through the hardships. They're the ones that didn't judge me. They didn't tell me that there's something wrong with me. They didn't say that, you're seeing things, Amanda. He's such a lovely man. He's a godly man. They just listened and they just loved. And, they're the people that were extremely safe to me. Yeah. And I'm still friends with them today.
That's awesome. Thank God for that.
Yes, most definitely.
Probably important to mention at this point that Amanda's husband, he was confessing some more serious issues. I think there was a lot of kind of hiding and lying and trying to cover up, but he did eventually confess some issues with pornography and masturbation, and some other behaviors that were really off the mark. And so he was aware to a degree that he had a problem, but there was also a lot of lying and covering up and finger pointing and
definitely
minimizing as well. What I'm doing
a lot of minimizing.
Yeah. So how were you feeling? How was your walk with God through all this?
Initially, when we first got married and I went on our honeymoon, I just could not believe that I had married someone like that. It was a real realization that instead of trusting my own relationship with God and listening to everyone else, I really doubted my own relationship with God. Like I really doubted hearing the Holy Spirit. And so therefore, over time, I started to get really angry at myself, which then therefore, because I got angry at myself because I didn't listen, I then started to get angry at God that I was actually in this position, that I'd made a decision to marry a man that, had a sexual addiction. And then I got to the point where, well, God, you know what? Like, I feel like you don't care about me anymore, because I'm crying out that, my husband would change, that he would start to be transparent, that he would actually make the steps of being accountable. So I was asking God all of this stuff all along, and I just felt like he wasn't there, he wasn't listening. And so I remember one particular night, and it was a horrific time, and my husband ended up going for a walk because we got into a bit of an argument. And when we went for the walk, when he went for the walk, I didn't know, but he was actually, peeping through another woman's window that had her blinds open and was watching her get undressed. And when he came back, I could just feel something yet again, and so, you know, I ended up getting extremely upset because I could feel that something had happened, and it took, you know, quite a few hours for him to actually confess that yes, he actually was, you know, looking at someone, and that he couldn't stop doing things like that because he just enjoyed it. And so for me, I just remember after, you know, crying and screaming and, you know, being so upset that he would deceive me like that. I remember crying out to God and just saying, you know what, God, I've just had enough. I'm just so sick of it. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I don't want anything to do with you, Father, Holy Spirit, or Jesus. I've had enough. And, you know, and I know during that time that, you know, it didn't take me long. It only took me, you know, a few hours that I was really sorry that I'd said that. But it was just about me being real and just how I felt, you know. And yeah, so for me it was really valuable after that because he didn't abandon me, and he was always there, and he was always kind, and he was trustworthy. But I just couldn't see it in the midst of it.
Amen.
But yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. You just, yeah, I think it's so easy for us to believe that we've done something unforgivable. We've crossed the line. That's it.
Yeah.
You can't. God can't possibly deal with our angry feelings towards our husbands or with him, and that's the end of it. And it's amazing how he just woos us back and shows us that I'm not letting go of you.
Yeah.
Can't get rid of me with that. Not by half.
Yeah.
So how about your feelings towards church in all this? I mean, did you have moments of negative feelings towards the church with what was going on?
Yeah, I did continue to go to church for a while, but you know, my husband just kept ogling other women when I was there, and I just got to the point where I just didn't feel supported. Every time I went to church, I felt traumatized. And so I then decided to step away from the particular church I was going to, and yeah, and I was actually okay with that. I needed a rest from everyone else sort of looking on, and yeah, I actually felt quite judged. I actually felt judged by the church, and after, you know, not long after I'd left the church, I actually went and saw, my husband and I went and saw the pastor and his wife to tell them, you know, the actual effects that sexual addiction has on the wife. And they listened, but they weren't really respondent of what we were talking about, because they didn't fully understand. And I actually expressed how I felt judged every time I went to church too. And then they said, well, that's not truth. You're not being judged. So, yeah, so I, you know, whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. But I really just didn't want to go to church for, you know, one reason was the judgment, and the other reason was because I was traumatized all the time. And because I just wasn't getting the support that I needed. All I needed was someone to sit beside me and say, I love you, and I care about you, and you're validated. But I never had that, and that's when I actually separated myself and actually searched, you know, on the internet for help. I searched, you know, to so many different websites, just looking for some form of help and just someone who actually understood. I was just yearning for someone to, to say, I understand what you're going through, Amanda, and you're not alone. And I didn't find that in the church that I was in. So I actually found it in outside the church, still within the body of Christ, but through a lovely lady all over on the other side of the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that was through Journey to Healing and Joy. That was, yeah, through Marsha Means. So,
Right.
yeah, she was beautiful. Mm.
That's how we ended up meeting.
Yes, that's how we ended up meeting. Yeah. So grateful.
Yeah, me too. I love this woman.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it's funny that what you were just saying, because I was really thinking about that this week, about how as Christians, and I'm saying this with my hand up too, because I know I've done this. We like to hand out formulas. Like, we're really comfortable saying, okay, well, if X is your situation, then the answer is Y, Z, or we'll hand out a scripture. But we're not really good at sitting and weeping with those who weep.
Mm.
Um, and that's an area that we need to grow in, because I think that,
Mm.
binding up the brokenhearted is a key part of Jesus' ministry. Setting prisoners free. Um, we need to focus on real authentic relationship with the hurting,
Mm.
rather than pat answers. And it's a lot harder, yes, but I think that's where real life is, and I think that's where Jesus is at.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not saying that because, like, I've never fallen into the formula trap. I know I have, but it's something I want to be mindful of. I don't want to end up there again.
Mm. Yeah, because every
Yeah.
person's different. Mm.
Yeah. Um, I wonder if you would mind sharing a little bit about some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that you used in the midst of this terrible pain you were in.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, due to the trauma and the pain, I actually reverted back to my eating disorder, which I ended up taking on due to other trauma that happened when I was 16, and it was abuse. And I started with my bulimia once again, and this probably started about 6 months just after the marriage. I actually started thinking, not consciously, but there was something. I just knew that there was something that I could control again, and so this was one thing that was familiar. So I went back, and then the pattern just then started forming of, well, I remember those feelings of comfort when I ate, and then, the shame and the guilt after I'd eaten, but then, purging, and then the release of that, and that whole cycle then took place again. And it was my way of coping. It was my way of controlling the situation of being married to a sex addict. It was something that I felt like I could control, and I was finally once again in control of my life. And I know that it wasn't okay, but it did give me some sense of, and I know it was a false security, but it did give me some sense of security at the time. And it wasn't just the bulimia. I did have one time where I went out and I got extremely drunk. And I even actually had thoughts of, that's it, I hope I hook up with someone. It was actually more of probably a revengeful thing, but that's the reality of the deep pain that was occurring within my heart, and I didn't know how to let it out. And because that time, I was still going through that process of not sort of feeling that God was close or he was distant, that I could actually turn to him in that time. So I actually pulled away a lot from God. And so, but I still knew that I didn't want to, do really bad stuff or go completely away from him. But I just still felt so alone as well. And so, so that I ended up doing things that I did when I was a teenager. I sort of reverted back, and so.
Yeah. And you're in good company, because the first survey that I did with Marcia, we had almost 700 respondents. I think it was over 80% of the women who had done stuff that they regretted in the pain, and things like getting drunk or starting drinking, eating disorders. These all came up. Overeating as well. on the other side of the eating disorder, the pain is severe, and
Mm.
we can really flounder. A lot of us come into this with, we don't have the depth in our relationship with God to just go wading through pain this bad. I did,
Mm.
and it certainly, in the book I talk a lot about the dumb things that I did that were harmful to myself, and from the point of view of a more mature person now, they look stupid. And I really appreciate when women share the things
Mm.
that they regret, that are kind of embarrassing for, all good Christian women
Most
don't.
definitely.
But a lot of us are. A lot of us have done some stupid things in the depth of the pain that we're ashamed of, and yet we've gotten to find out that God's forgiveness is there for us. God's love is there for us. And that
Mm.
when we talk to each other and find out, wow, I'm not the only person that, do these really reprehensible things,
Mm.
in the midst of my pain, there's a lot of comfort to be had there. And we can kind of grieve, the regret and embarrassment, and then let go of that and say that's now part of my past.
Mm.
So I really thank you for sharing some of your hard stuff, because it's not an easy thing to do.
Mm.
How did you get past the destructive emotions and beliefs, and this self-harming that you were doing through your diet and purging?
Yeah, for me, it actually got to the point where because my husband was, even, 3 years into the marriage, he was still lying, he was still deceiving, and I just got to the point where it was like, enough is enough. I just cannot keep going like this. Um, so the environment was really toxic. So I just knew I had to leave. And so in actually leaving, Ivan, it was, it wasn't an easy process, but for me, it actually enabled me then to really seek after God again. I felt like it was, this is my own story, but for me, I needed to separate from the environment to actually to be okay again. And, I really believed that, me talking to God over, months prior and getting confirmation from him that it was time. But yeah, once I made the decision to leave my husband, um, yeah, it was then me seeking God, and it was me just being with God, having my beautiful young boys return back to me. Um, yeah, that my sense of worth started to restore. God started to start telling me, not telling me, but well, it was telling me, but also reassuring me who I am in Him. That I am worthy to be loved, that I am, worth being pursued, that I am a delight. That I'm a beautiful daughter of His. And so, hearing all those words of affirmation from Him, all it's done is just build me up, and knowing, what, even if I never meet anyone again, if I never marry again, I have the affirmation and the love from my heavenly daddy, and he is just, he's so wonderful and so kind, and that is what has brought me out. Nothing else. It's been me desiring him, but most of all, it's not even me desiring him, it's him desiring me, and I feel rescued, I feel safe, I feel secure by him. He's restoring my relationship with my boys, because I lost them due to this marriage, and it hasn't been easy, but I'm seeing the fruits of it. I'm seeing the Lord sort through, such deep stuff in my boys' life and also within my own life. So yeah, the reality of my relationship with the Trinity is, it's exciting. Each day is new, but there's something really beautiful in each day. And just another exciting part as well is that, I used to suffer from severe depression, and the Lord over the last, it's been 8 weeks now that I haven't been on any medication, which is beautiful, but I'm okay with medication because I needed it for the time. And but as I know more and more how much He loves me and cares about me, that that He's there in everything. So so now it's been a good journey coming out. So it hasn't been easy, but it's good.
Yeah, you've really encouraged me on my journey. You've been one of my friends and mentors, I think, in the last few years since I've known you, and it's been kind of fun because it seems like we've been on a bit of a parallel journey. And in some ways, growing deeper and deeper into the heart of God, and just getting to that place of knowing how precious we are to God that we thought couldn't possibly handle what we were doing. And so able to do it. Just as one final question for you, what is it? And I know I'm catching you in a bit of a weird time because I know you're going to know more tomorrow because you've got a big meeting. But what is God putting on your heart with regards to other women these days, other wives of sex addicts?
Particularly in my country. It wasn't long after I was married to my husband that I was just praying to God, and I was praying in the Spirit of God, and next minute I could actually hear these cries from these women in this nation of Australia. I could literally hear them, and I could actually hear their hearts. I could hear the desperation. I could hear the pain. I could hear the isolation coming from their hearts. And I wept, and I could not stop weeping. And I remember, saying to God, whatever you want me to do, I will do. And so, tomorrow I'm meeting up with a beautiful lady that she runs a beautiful ministry called City Women, which helps so many different ministries within our town, but also especially in the outer regions of Queensland as well. And so I'm going to be talking to her tomorrow about maybe facilitating a group or running a group where there's actually support for women here in Australia that, are wives of sex addicts or partners of sex addicts, that they're not alone. Because when I was looking 3 years ago, and I have 3.5 years ago, and I also have been continually looking, there's no support. And I would love to see support here for the ladies of this nation, because we desperately need it. This country, I've actually been to America. Yes, there's a lot of sexualization, but coming into Australia, the sexualization here is huge, absolutely huge. And there is not the awareness in this country of sexual addiction. But not just that. There's the sexual addiction, but it's the partners of the sex addict, that there is no safe place. There is nothing here for them. And if I can just help in just any small way, I am willing. And so that's why I'm meeting with this lovely lady tomorrow. So, yeah.
I'm so excited about that.
Please pray. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm laughing because I felt that God put it on my heart a couple of years ago to pray that you would be a source of light to the women of Australia in this area. And you and I never discussed this, and any kind of inkling that, and I would talk about the stuff I was beginning to do here, and groups started, and I facilitate a group here in my hometown, and I'm organizing a conference for training counselors this coming November. And I never got much sense of any this moving forward, this seed growing in your heart, but I just kept praying that God would keep growing it in His time. And then you just kind of like just threw this out on me in the last week, and I was like doing the dance of joy. I was so excited.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's so
Yeah,
cool.
it's very exciting.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for your strength, your bravery, your honesty, your gorgeous heart, and for sharing that with other women. And
Yeah.
like we said at the beginning when we were praying before we went on air, we talked about, if it helps one other woman who was like us, who just felt isolated and didn't have anybody, then,
Mm.
it's so worth it. And we give this to God to do whatever He can do and wants to do with it.
Yeah.
So I want to let you know that I'm going to be continuing to write articles on the topic of spiritual crisis at Beyond Betrayal blog, and there was supposed to be something that was showing you the URL, but the URL, if you can't see it on your screen, looks something like www.beyondbetrayal.community. And this video will be after. If you want to share it with friends, it'll live there for a while, and you can, by all means, share it with anyone you think would benefit from it. Thank you so much for watching, spending this last 40 minutes with us, and I hope we'll have you for another one of these sometime in the future if we can get the technology down pat. We're obviously not quite geniuses at it yet, but not too bad for a first go, I'd say. So thank you so much, and until next time.